Tim Thompson. I've been doing this for about 29 years. I've spent 10 years at American Agco, and I've spent the last 19 years with Carlos Akey out of Lewisburg, Ohio. And my job takes me to, I work with about 30 nutritionists out in the field. I travel to many different places as far as the West, Canada, Japan. So I get to see a lot of different things and how things work and what things don't work. One of the things that the Shredlage, when Roger came up with this idea, it was really intrigued me because one of the big things we always run into with corn silage is as you increase corn silage in the diet, we need to have more stuff in the top pan because the digestibility of the fiber is a lot better in corn silage compared to legume silages. And then now when we start shredding this, we're making digestibility even higher. So we need to have more in the top pan. Oops. See if this works. Maybe I'll have to have Roger sit there and get the zapper on him. Is that what? There we go. There, I only got two hands, so that'll help free me up here. But there's longitudinally ripped forage, but it increases the surface area, and what this does is it increases binding sites for the bacteria, for the fiber digesting bacteria to attach. And it also allows us, like I said, to make this longer. So we can increase the particle size in the top pan, but we got to keep it palatable. Okay? Miner Institute did some work on this as far as you increase the digestibility of your fiber sources, in order to maintain your rumen mat, you need to increase the particle size. When we start moving with high corn silage diets, if we start chopping them longer, we're going to end up with what Roger refers to as cigar butts, but we're going to end up with these pieces that are very unpalatable. A cow will swallow a piece about between her two nostrils. She'll go in and swallow. When she's eating a TMR, that's all she's doing is grabbing and swallowing. She's not going to stop and chew like when she eats baled hay. So whenever she gets the pieces that are too large to swallow, she's going to sort them out and not eat them. So that's why when we start talking about corn silage, we got to do something else to process this corn silage up so these fibers are palatable to the cow. Roger talked a little bit about the stalk piece the size of an alfalfa stem. We'll look at some of these pictures here, some of the pictures that Ross already showed. We'll go into that in a little more detail and look at some of those pieces. That rind of that plant completely opened up. Again, the smashed kernels. But this effect here, this softer and fluffier effect, because you're tearing up this fiber longitudinally, it's a lot more palatable to the cow. So it's not like she's eating sticks. So she'll grab it and she'll swallow it. 26 to 30 millimeters is typical length. You can vary this any length you want. Now, a lot of it's going to have to depend on your diet, too. It's going to depend on the moisture content of the corn, what you're doing with it. If you're putting it in a bagger, you're going to have to make this longer because the bagger is going to process it up some more. Okay? Go the other way. This is Dr. Shaver's work on looking at starch digestibility of this. Here you see between a regular kernel process, the corn regular kernel process compared to shredlage, they had about a 25% increase in digestibility, starch digestibility on that. We've seen this at Akey's. We run a model. We've been running a model for about the last 18 years. And a model that takes into consideration how your grains, forages, protein sources are all working together to feed the cow. This is taking into effect what's going on in the rumen. In order for that to be accurate, you have to describe to the model what your forages and grain sources are like. So we've spent a lot of time in this thing determining what the effects of particle size, moisture content, time and fermentation have to do with this. And this particle size has a huge impact on the digestibility of your starch. We've seen range from 14 to 40% increase depending on what we're doing with the particle size. So this is very real what we've seen in the country. Likewise, fiber. NDF total tract fiber, you can see here, this is again Dr. Shaver's work. They saw an increase of about 12% increase in digestible fiber. But keep in mind what Roger was talking about before, they're ripping apart, exposing all the fiber. There's some enzyme products out there that have talked about this, and we've seen similar results from that as well. This 12 to 16% increase in fiber digestibility. And it's all because we're making it more available to the rumen bacteria to digest, just increasing surface area. Here's a picture of the corn silage. This is a fermented corn silage. But you can see how the rind and everything's just broken up. Now this is something that resembles an alfalfa stem. This is something she's just going to grab and swallow and not have a problem with that. If that was the whole stem, she'll sort that out. And that's a valuable piece of fiber that we need to go into the cow because we're counting on that to help form that rumen mat. Then just the appearance of the whole thing as well. When you have these when you have these pieces like this, all torn up like that, it makes a better rumen mat. And that's one of the things that we've seen in a lot of these dairies that have gone to shredlage. We do part of our job when our nutritionists would go out in the field. A lot of times we're washing manure. So we're walking around looking at manure, and one of the things that we've seen with shredlage diets, the manure becomes extremely consistent. We don't have that variability telling us one thing, the cows aren't sorting, but also we're probably making a better rumen mat. Okay, Ross. There's the fresh corn silage, and again, you can see how everything's just really torn up, how the rind's just totally pretty much stripped right off that pith. But this becomes a palatable piece of nutrition for the cow. She's not going to sort against it. And you can see how the kernels are all destroyed, pretty much all tore apart. Okay. Ideally, here's what Roger came up with on doing some of these shaker boxes, 30 millimeters, ends up with about a 35, 45, 19. So we're running about 35 on the top. This is by far the longest you'd ever want to have this. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't want to, the only way I would want to do this is if I'm going into a bag. Because then you're going to get some destruction of that. Because otherwise we might end up with too long, depending, of course, how much you've got in the diet, how much corn silage you got in the diet. Okay. Here's some different shaker boxes as far as what it looks like, as far as off the length of chop that they chopped at. 30 millimeters, we had 35 on top, but 22 millimeters, we had about 18 on top. Get down to 17 millimeters, 9 on top, and in a conventional kernel process, we're down to about 8 on top. Now, if you're looking at less than 15 pounds of dry matter in the diet from corn silage, having it down here is probably not a big deal because you probably got legumes and other things and other types of forages in the diet with longer particle size, less digestibility. It's not going to be as crucial. But if you start going above 15 pounds of dry matter from corn silage, and especially you start getting up into 20 pounds and higher, you're going to want to be up in here because otherwise you're going to lack the particle size that it's going to take to keep a good rumen mat. These were all done at about 62% moisture, and again, I want to reiterate, when the drier it is, the shorter it's got to be. The wetter it is, the longer you can let it go. Okay. They just had this slide up as well. For the most part, a lot of our diets, we've been kind of sticking in this 23 to 26 theoretical cut. It does make a nice corn silage. Here's, so what we're looking at, shredlage, these all corn silage diets. This is kind of the goal I shoot for, is trying to have that 20 to 25, like I said, maybe even 30. One thing that comes into that thing too as well is the varieties that you're planting. So if we start talking BMRs, we want to have that a little longer as well. Because you got more digestible fiber. Now we're tearing it up even more. It's going to make it even more digestible. Okay? So we want to keep our length. These top two pans, I want to be over 75%. So I want to have it coarse. Because these high corn silage diets, that's what you're going to need. Because when we get in these high corn silage TMRs or highly digestible ones, this is what I want on the top pan for the TMR. The old recommendation of Penn State Shaker Box was 6 to 10 on the top. That's with just regular diets. When we start talking about these high corn silage diets, you will not have a very good rumen mat. You will have very inconsistent manure, and we'll get feed passage through, and we see that when we wash manure. So we need to have this top pan, something substantial that's going to help make a rumen mat. Over 40 in the second, and then so on. One of the things when I look at that top pan, though, I want to look through those pieces. I don't want pieces really over 2 inches long. And the shorter the better. So as long as it stays in the top pan, that's great, but I don't want it really, really long. I want that 1.5, 2 inches long. Works really good. The cows aren't going to sort it, and it's going to make sure we're eating our TMR. So this going back to this slide here, so when we look at that, when I'm looking at that 20 to 25, so that puts us right in this ballpark here. So when we start talking, like on that last slide where it showed 23 to 26 was where we ran, and that's kind of what you're looking at, because that's going to get you in the ballpark of where we need to be to start from. Then you start measuring. Okay. Here, I ran a couple diets here, and what I did was I took some diets and I modeled, what I did is I modeled what's going on with the shredlage, and I modeled at the lowest points of what we typically see as far as increase in digestibility. So this is the lowest point, okay? So I'm saying I have an increase because I got a shredlage in here with a 70 plus compared to a regular kernel process at a 56. For the last year, or last couple of years, or whatever. So that's what a typical corn silage, which people would consider processed, and they get a processing score of 56 has been the average. So we compared these two, and again, I put a very mild adjustment. Like I said before, we've seen ranges from 14 up to as high as 40% increase in ruminal digestibility, depending on the variety, moisture, time in fermentation, etc. So I just put a 14% on here. As far as the fiber digestion, like Randy's work, it showed up about 12% increase in fiber digestibility. I put a very small one of about 5 or 6%. So it kept it very small. Under promise, over deliver. That's what we want to do. So I let the computer go through and balance this diet. So it at least costed this diet and see what we would come up with. Because we're putting in more digestible carbohydrates, we're giving more for the rumen bacteria to do their job and make more ruminal protein out of that. So we need less bypass protein, so that's what the difference is basically in these two diets. You can see here the forages are the same as far as corn silage. The haylage really wasn't much different. Actually, corn wasn't much different in this diet. Just some differences in where the proteins were. And here's what we get the difference on cost. So we got about a 34-cent savings just right out of the gate on the cost of this diet. Just because we have a better processed, more available carbohydrates going to the cow. Same feed. Okay. Here's just looking at that diet from a standpoint that you might be a little more familiar with as far as crude proteins, fibers, starch content, NFC, etc. You can see they're very similar. Metabolizable protein is exactly the same. So what's delivered from the rumen is exactly the same, but it's a combination of where it's coming from. This is coming from the bacteria. You can see we get less because of the fact we had less carbohydrates available to them, and we had to feed more bypass protein. And bypass protein costs money. Okay, Ross? Here's what the prediction from the model as far as what the ration's good for. You can see pretty much balanced. Both of them were balanced right around 85 pounds of milk. Okay? Ross? Here's the next diet. Roger wanted me to take a look at a 100% corn silage diet. So we put that in there, and now we're not saying this is what you're on to go to, but we do have people that have gone to this, right? We've had people that have gone this route. You'll see in here I do have 1 pound of straw in here, but I had to put 1 pound of straw in here because the corn silage I was using off the samples that we've had was 37% starch, and my carbohydrates were actually getting too high in the ration, so I had to put a little straw in there to water it down a little bit. So that's exactly. Because then we can make things too hot for the rumen to handle. So here we're running 86 pounds of shredlage compared to 86 pounds of regular kernel process. You can see in here we don't need any corn anymore in our diet, and a little small amount of corn in this diet. But here again, that difference, 27 cents here. So it's right around that 30 cents, give or take. And now keep in mind, guys, this is the minimum response we expect to see. This could be, you could double this easily, depending on the variety you have and et cetera.